In Pedro Costa's 2006 film Colossal Youth, gentrification leads to destabilization for the working class and largely Cape Verdean migrant community in the Portuguese capital of Lisbon. Together, the unique characteristics of digital video, a painterly compositional style, stillness and duration, stark chiaroscuro lighting, naturalistic performances of non-professional actors, and elliptical editing create a socio-politically engaged portrait of fragmentation, displacement, and forced relocation into a cold, sterile environment. Colossal Youth channels the foundational tenets of third cinema to become an act of political representation and historical testimony through its emphasis on the violent erasure of gentrification and the subaltern status of the Fontañas community, with Fontañas framed as an internal colony in limbo within the imperial core. Colossal Youth's alignment with Third Cinema's ideals can be observed to its rejection of commercialism and auteurism as represented by First and Second Cinema, while uplifting its oppressed subjects, foregrounding collective memory and testimony. Solanas and Agatino envisioned Third Cinema as a decommodified form that was anti-colonial and politically engaged. Decolonization of culture, quote unquote, which is equally a political and revolutionary act, not only an aesthetic concern. Colossal Youth challenges dominant cinematic languages, centers and oppressed people, and rejects Western narrative closure, where self-definition of the oppressed is present on screen. The use of digital video and a Baroque sensibility to lighting and composition to create a decaying, painterly texture reflects the social neglect and deterioration of Fontañas. In a scene when Ventura, who represents the eternal spirit of Fontañas, sits in a ruined home, and the long static take frames him like a Dutch painting, it is full of stark lighting and shadows, surrounded in silence by peeling walls and luminous shadows. Here, Ventura transcends his humble station and reaches a place that is usually associated with far more powerful elite social figures. Harvard Film Archive describes Costa's portraits as containing a majestic quality that grants characters with a greater significance in the narrative. Camoli highlights how Costa's visual forms cannot be disassociated from his political leanings, remarking that the film's frames are never innocent, never detached from the reality of poverty and exclusion. Naguib also underlines the impact of Costa's digital aesthetic, mentioning that the realism in Colossal Youth arises not in spite of its formal rigor, but because of it. The film employs a style that is utilized as a way of interrogating global structures of inequality through intimacy and restraint. Colossal Youth actively confers a visual dignity to its subjects that is frequently absent from dominant forms of media. Abandoned interiors and marginalized bodies given an extra layer of political expression. The durational cinema of Colossal Youth challenges the concepts of time under capitalist modes of production, as well as traditional narrative progression. When Ventura explores a newly prefabricated apartment, he moves slowly through the sterility of a harsh, geometrically exact space, eclipsed by an architecturally driven social erasure. Here, time becomes politicized. As noted by Naguib, Costa transforms cinematic time into a political site, resisting narrative momentum and capitalist time discipline. Maimon's comparative study of Costa and Iranian director Abbas Kiarostami illustrates how Costa's aesthetic decisions create a minor cinema that resists dominant regimes of representation by focusing on duration, fragility, and presence. This suspension of time is described by Costa in his own words in an interview with Bomb magazine as the everlasting present, a state where characters exist through past and present dislocations. Brothers Georgi characterizes Costa's temporal choices as daily labor that centers stillness and repetition as the articulation of a political vision, where working slowly accentuates the lived rhythms of marginality amplifying these experiences as an aesthetic of social engagement. Colossal Youth's temporal and spatial affects oppose cinematic spectacle and depicts marginalized lives with quiet and slow-moving reverence. Costa uses fiction as a type of testimony through the collaboration with non-professional actors from Fontañas, some of whom are playing roles loosely based on themselves, reveals the film's subtext of historical privation and dispossession, as well as post-colonial displacement. In a scene where Ventura recites a letter multiple times, his poetic repetition obscures the lines between fiction and real memory and the collective trauma of displacement. The narrative within the film unfolds through ellipses where time, place, and memory overlap and take on a floating, nebulous form. The elliptical editing communicates a disregard for traditional narrative structure and provides the film with an otherworldly atmosphere that steps into dreamlike territory. Marmon argues that Costa produces a convergence of the actual and the imaginary when working with the non-professional actors of Fontañas in a state of coexistence. The aesthetic choice of an embodied presence transforms into constructing a political perception of the body, with political messaging being both physically felt and visually represented. In another scene with a long and mostly quiet take, Ventura and another character, Lento, converse about labor, memory, and deterioration inside of a structure set for demolition, their presence in the detritus conjuring an intractable perseverance. Ventura and Lento are defiant in the face of removal, both spatially and temporally. Blash understands Ventura's role within the film as symbol for the wider story of the displacement of the inhabitant of the neighborhood. Betts argues that the gentrification of Fontañas is a form of cultural erasure, converting the once lively community with state-run barrenness. The sanitized apartment is not just cleaner, it is culturally empty. Costa explicitly presents gentrification as a signifier of Fontaña's condition as an internal colony. The on-screen presence of non-professional actors transmutes performances into a form of oral history, collective memory, and cinematic testimony through spatial, embodied, and visual avenues to stress the subjectivity and inherent humanity of a marginalized people that confronts their post-colonial presence within the imperial core. Colossal Youth transmogrifies an austere aesthetic into a form of political practice. The interplay between the use of digital video, a Baroque and painterly compositional style, stillness, durational process, a non-traditional narrative structure, and a collaboration with non-professional actors serve as conduits to practice the essential principles of third cinema. Subjected to an enduring colonial status quo, the Fontañas community carves out a rarefied form of dignity, distinction, and perpetuity, implying that the forward march of time is not enough to extinguish a community's essence.